I once booked an Airbnb by myself in Arizona. I had a job interview lined up with a company about 5 hours from where I lived, and since the drive was so long, I figured I'd make a short trip out of it and spend a few days there. I was still working my regular remote job at the time, so I brought my laptop along to stay on top of work while I was away. The idea was to spend the days working, go to the interview, and use the rest of the time to relax a little. Maybe check out the area, eat at some local places, and clear my head a bit before heading back home. I didn't want to spend too much money on a hotel, and most of the options nearby were either booked or overpriced. I ended up finding this one Airbnb that was much cheaper than anything else around, almost half the price of the hotels. The pictures showed a small one-bedroom house, kind of isolated, but clean and cozy. It was about a 30-minute drive from the place I'd be interviewing at. That distance was fine with me. In fact, I kind of liked that it was out of the way. I figured it would be quiet, peaceful, and a good spot to focus. The listing mentioned it was on a dead-end road, with a big open view of the desert out back. I got there on a Sunday afternoon. The house was a little farther out than I expected. I had to take a couple small highways and then turn off onto a dirt road that ran between some low hills and eventually narrowed into a single lane. There weren't any other houses nearby, at least not any I could see. The house sat at the very end of the road. It was a one-story building with a porch out front, a carport on the side, and a chain-link fence enclosing the yard. The backyard opened up straight into the desert. Low brush, sand, and distant rocky ridges. It was beautiful in that dry, wide-open kind of way. I let myself in using the code the host had given me. Inside, the place was small, but it looked just like the photos. There was a little living room with a couch and a coffee table, a small dining table near the kitchen, a hallway that led to a bedroom and bathroom, and that was basically it. Nothing fancy, but it was clean. It smelled like dust and a bit like lemon cleaning spray. The windows had curtains, but no blinds, and most of the ones facing the backyard didn't have much covering at all. I unpacked my bag, set my laptop up at the kitchen table, and settled in. Monday came and went mostly without anything unusual happening. I worked during the day, took a break in the late afternoon to walk around the property, then came back inside and made some dinner. I was feeling nervous about the interview, so I spent the evening looking over my notes, reading up on the company, and practicing answers to common questions. It was around 9 p.m. when I heard a tapping sound. It wasn't loud. It was very light. It didn't sound like a knock, more like someone tapping a single finger against glass. The sound came from the window just to the left of the couch. I was sitting in the living room at the time with my laptop open on the coffee table. I froze and looked over. The curtain was drawn, but I couldn't see anyone's shadow or anything like that. Still, I got up and pulled the curtain back just enough to peek out. I couldn't see anything but the darkness. The outside light didn't reach that side of the house, and there was nothing but black beyond the glass. I looked for a minute or two, trying to catch some movement, but saw nothing. I told myself it was probably just a bug. Arizona had its share of those, and some of them were big enough to make a noise when they hit a window. Still, the sound had felt oddly deliberate, like someone meant for me to hear it. I shrugged it off eventually and went back to my laptop. The rest of the night was quiet. Tuesday was my interview day. I left the house around 8 a.m., drove into town, and got there a little early. The interview itself went well, or at least I thought it did. I felt good afterward, like I'd done everything I could. On the way back, I stopped for lunch at a diner, then drove around a bit to get a feel for the area. I picked up some groceries at a local store before heading back to the Airbnb. That evening, after finishing up some remote work, I went out back and sat in a lawn chair to relax. The sun was setting and the whole desert lit up with deep reds and golds. It was incredibly peaceful. I had a beer in hand and was just watching the colors shift and fade. I stayed out there until it got dark and a bit chilly, then went back inside. That night, around the same time, close to 9 p.m., I heard the tapping again. This time, I was watching Netflix on my laptop in the living room. I paused the show and sat up straight. The tap came again. Same window, same soft, deliberate sound. It was too similar to be random. My stomach tightened. I stood up and moved slowly to the window. My heart was beating fast. I yanked the curtain aside and stared out, but again, saw nothing. I went around and checked all the windows and then opened the front door. I stepped out onto the porch and looked around. The night was quiet. No wind, no cars, just silence. I waited a moment, then went back inside and locked the door again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, just out of sight. Still on edge, I decided to check the backyard. I went through the kitchen, unlocked the back door, and stepped out onto the porch. The outside light spilled across the small patio and the dirt just beyond it. But the light ended abruptly, and beyond it was nothing but dark shapes of bushes and uneven desert terrain. I stood there listening. Then I heard a sound. A click. It was the sound someone makes when they click their tongue at the roof of their mouth. It came from the darkness, beyond the edge of the porch light. It was soft but clear. I froze. I scanned the area, squinting into the dark. Then I heard another click, this one louder. I could feel the direction it came from. My eyes locked onto a spot near a low bush. That's when I saw him. Someone was standing there. Person maybe 30 or 40 feet away, wearing dark clothes. Their shape was just barely visible against the shadows. No flashlight, no movement, just standing there, watching. I took one step off the porch, then stopped. I didn't want to get closer. I didn't know who it was, and something about the way they were just standing there felt incredibly wrong. I called out, warning them they were on private property and that I'd call the police if they didn't leave. The figure stood still for a moment, then turned and walked away, quickly and quietly, fading into the darkness. I went back inside and locked both doors. I stayed up late that night, double-checking the windows and trying to figure out what to do. I even thought about leaving, but part of me wanted to believe it was just some random person passing through. Maybe even someone who was lost or thought the place was empty. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Wednesday was quiet. I worked, ate, and kept mostly to the house. I didn't go outside much. I kept the curtains drawn. That night, I stayed in the bedroom and tried to keep my mind off what had happened. I watched more Netflix, this time from bed, and tried to convince myself it was over. Sometime around midnight, I turned off the laptop and the light. The room went completely dark except for the moonlight coming through the window. I lay there trying to sleep. My mind kept replaying the sound from the night before. I stared at the ceiling, eyes open, waiting. That's when I heard it again. Another click. But this one didn't come from outside. Came from inside the room. More specifically, from the closet. I sat up in bed, heart racing. The closet door was cracked open just a few inches. The sound hadn't been loud, but it had come from inside. Not outside the window, not from the walls. Inside. I stared at that gap in the door for a full minute, frozen. Then I moved. I grabbed my phone, still in my pajamas, and quietly but quickly left the room. I walked straight out the front door, into the driveway, and got into my car. I locked the doors and started the engine, hands shaking. I called 911. While I waited for the police to arrive, I kept my eyes on the house. I expected to see someone come out, to see movement through the windows, but nothing happened. The house stayed still and dark. The police arrived within about 20 minutes. I explained everything to them. What I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I thought might be going on. They searched the house with me. We looked in the closet first, and it was empty. We looked under the bed, in the kitchen cabinets, behind the shower curtain, any place a person might hide. There was nothing. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry. Everything was locked. It didn't make any sense. But I knew what I'd heard. That clicking sound had been real. After the officers left, I packed my stuff as quickly as I could. I didn't care if it was late. I wasn't staying another night. I found a hotel about 20 minutes away and booked a room on my phone from the driveway. I left that Airbnb behind without looking back. I reached out to the Airbnb host and explained the situation. They acted surprised and said no one else should have had access to the house. They offered a partial refund but wouldn't take responsibility for what had happened. I also contacted Airbnb directly. They gave me the same story, that there was no evidence of wrongdoing and that without proof, they couldn't do much. I accepted the partial refund and let it go. But even now, I think about that night. In November of 2021, I flew from Philly to Las Vegas to compete in a jiu-jitsu tournament. I had done this kind of trip a bunch of times before. Different cities, different states, different tournaments, but usually I was never alone. I would travel with teammates, or at least coordinate to crash wherever a few of them were staying. We'd split an Airbnb, or stay with a local gym that hosted competitors. It helped cut costs, and honestly, it made things feel safer and more familiar. But this time, things were different. Some of my usual crew couldn't make it, and the ones who did were staying with their families or booked up with other plans. I didn't have that backup, and I didn't want to miss the competition. So I decided to just go solo this time. I booked an Airbnb quickly without giving it much thought. It was a small studio apartment just a few blocks from the Strip. At first glance, it seemed all right. Affordable, close to the venue. I figured I wouldn't be spending much time there anyway. I'd be out most of the day training, competing, eating, sleeping. That was the plan. I remember seeing a few pictures of the place. A single bed, a small kitchenette, and a bathroom that looked clean enough. The host's profile picture was just a flower. No name, no face. That struck me as a little odd, but the reviews were solid. I think it had something like 4.6 stars. A bunch of people saying quiet, simple, good price. So I clicked confirm without digging deeper. When I landed in Vegas, the sun was just setting. I didn't rent a car. I figured I'd just Uber around since everything I needed was nearby. The neighborhood the Airbnb was in didn't look great. Not awful, but kind of run down. A lot of chain link fences, overgrown yards, broken sidewalks. Some of the houses had bars on the windows, and there were more than a few people just kind of lingering around outside. It didn't feel violent exactly, but it definitely wasn't the kind of place you'd want to wander around in at night. Still, I told myself it was fine. I had stayed in worse spots. I wasn't there on vacation, I was there to fight and then go home. I messaged the host that I had arrived. They replied with the key code to get into the studio apartment. No greeting, no welcome, just the digits. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I actually laughed a little when I saw it. It seemed so lazy and stupid that it almost calmed me down. Like, who uses that as a lock code? But then I saw the Wi-Fi password taped to the wall above the router. Password. That's when I figured the host must have been older, maybe not too tech-savvy. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. The apartment was attached to the main house, but it had its own entrance on the side, kind of like a guest house. It was small but functional. A bed, a kitchenette with a hot plate and microwave, a mini fridge, a sink, and a small bathroom with a shower. The walls were thin. I could hear the muffled sounds of the TV from next door, but it didn't bother me too much. I dropped my bag on the bed, unpacked just enough for the next day, and made a quick run to grab water and snacks. By the time I got back, it was around 8:30 p.m. I was tired. Traveling always drains me, even if I'm just sitting on a plane. I changed into sweats, stretched a bit, and laid down on the bed with my phone. Scrolled through social media, answered a few texts, and started drifting off. That's when I heard the tapping. It was soft, like the kind of noise you'd make if you didn't want to be heard, but still wanted to be heard. The window was directly in front of the bed, about 3 feet away. It had heavy curtains pulled across it, so I couldn't see anything. Just that quiet, irregular tapping. I sat up and said, "Huh," out loud, not really expecting anything in return. The tapping stopped immediately. I stared at the curtains for a minute, then laid back down, assuming it was some random noise. Maybe a tree branch, maybe a bird. A minute or two later, it started again. Still soft, still intentional. Just tap, tap, tap. That time I sat all the way up and said, louder, "Hello." It stopped again. I stayed sitting up this time, staring at the window, listening. Nothing. I waited maybe 5 minutes before I pulled out my phone and messaged the host. I asked, politely, if they had knocked on the window or tried to get my attention. Then I waited. Nothing for about an hour. I didn't feel comfortable lying down again. I sat on the edge of the bed, fully awake now, just kind of waiting. I thought about putting on shoes and going for a walk. Maybe grabbing something from a corner store just to clear my head. Or maybe taking a hot shower. But something told me not to. I don't even know what. Just a feeling. I stayed put. It was just past midnight when I heard it again. This time not from the window. It was outside the door. A scraping sound. Then soft footsteps. Then a quiet beep. Someone was entering the key code. I froze. The sound was unmistakable. Beep, 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 beep. 7 digits. A second passed. The code didn't work. I heard a pause. Then the sound of someone trying again. This time, I heard the click of the deadbolt unlocking. My adrenaline surged. I jumped up and bolted for the door. I got there just as it started to open inward. I threw my weight against it, slamming it shut with everything I had. It hit something or someone on the other side. I felt the resistance, the weight of whoever was trying to come in. I yelled through the door, loud and angry. "This is my room. Get out of here." I was trying to sound bigger than I felt. My hands were shaking. I was forcing my body against the door, bracing my foot against the floor, shoving the deadbolt back in place. From the other side, I heard a low male voice say something. It was hard to make out, but I clearly heard the name Midel. That was the host's name from the reservation. "This is my room," the voice said again. Calm, deep, confident. I didn't respond. I just kept yelling the same thing, over and over, hoping it sounded like I wasn't alone. "This is my room. Get out." I pulled out my phone and called the police. I made sure to say the words, "I'm calling the cops," loud enough for them to hear. I don't know how long the person stayed there, but it felt like forever. At some point, the doorknob stopped moving. The pressure against the door eased. I stood there for a while longer, not moving, just breathing hard, listening. Finally, I heard footsteps fading away. I stayed on the phone with the dispatcher until officers arrived, which took maybe 15 minutes. When they showed up, they knocked on the door and I opened it carefully. There were 2 of them. They didn't seem surprised by the story I told. One of them said, "Yeah, we've been here before." That didn't make me feel any better. They asked me a few questions, checked the surrounding area with their flashlights, and then talked to the host. The host came out of the main house and was immediately defensive. I could hear them arguing with the cops, saying different things. First that they'd been checking on me, then that they thought the unit was empty, then that a family member must have used the code by mistake. Their story kept changing. The cops weren't buying it. They told me they'd wait outside while I packed up and called an Uber. I threw everything I had into my bag in about 2 minutes. Didn't even check to see if I left anything behind. I just wanted out of there. When my Uber pulled up, I walked straight to it. I didn't look back. The driver didn't say much when I got in. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost, but I didn't feel like explaining. I ended up finding a hotel farther down the strip. It was more expensive, but I didn't care. I paid for 2 nights just to give myself space and peace. I barely slept that first night, even in a much safer place with a real lock and key. For weeks afterward, I kept thinking about that tapping on the window, the weird code, the timing of it all. If someone knew I was flying in from Philly, then 9:30 p.m. Vegas time would have been 12:30 a.m. for me. That means they might have been trying to catch me when I was already half asleep, maybe not as alert. And the door unlocking happened just after midnight. That's 3 a.m. Philly time, prime time for deep sleep. I don't know if it was meant to be a robbery, maybe, but it didn't feel like someone just looking for cash or electronics. The timing, the way they opened the door instead of knocking, the fact that the host was being evasive, it felt coordinated. Like they were hoping to catch me in a vulnerable moment. I never got a clear answer. I reported the incident to AIRBNB, but I don't think anything came of it. The host's listing was still up a few months later. I left a review with just enough detail to warn people without sounding dramatic. Most people won't believe something like that until it happens to them anyway. I still compete in tournaments. I still travel, but I'm never careless about where I stay anymore. I double-check the neighborhood. I make sure the host has a real name and photo. I read the bad reviews first, and I always make sure there's more than one way out of any room I sleep in, because I still think about what would have happened if I hadn't made it to that door in time. If I'd frozen, or hesitated, or just been deeper asleep. I still wonder who was on the other side, and I still hate that I never saw their face. So my friend, we'll call her, was living in Bath, England at the time with her boyfriend, Jay. They were renting a small flat close to the center of town, and they loved it. It was one of those old Georgian buildings with creaky floors, high ceilings, and huge windows that let in cold drafts even when they were closed tight. Bath had always had that quiet, ancient charm, the kind of place where the past didn't feel like history. It felt like it was still breathing just behind the walls. When A's family came to visit, her sister, her mom, and her stepdad, they decided not to crowd into the flat. Instead, they rented an Airbnb nearby so they could all have a little space but still spend time together. The Airbnb was just a short walk away, tucked into a narrow street that curved sharply and seemed to always be in shadow, even in the middle of the day. From the outside, it looked pretty standard, whitewashed stone, 2 stories, big bay window, but something about it seemed off. The kind of thing you feel before you can explain. The place was split into 2 floors. The bedrooms were all on the ground floor, and above them, the kitchen and living room took up most of the second floor. The bathroom was on the stair landing, halfway between the 2 levels, which made it feel like it didn't quite belong to either. That first night, everyone was in good spirits. They cooked dinner, drank wine, caught up on stories, and eventually everyone made their way to bed. A's sister went to the bathroom around midnight. Nothing strange at first, but as she stood at the sink brushing her teeth, she heard it. What sounded like a woman sobbing quietly, just outside the bathroom door. She paused, toothbrush still in her mouth, and listened. It wasn't dramatic, not wailing, just soft crying like someone holding it in. She thought it might be her mom. Maybe something had happened, or she was upset about something she hadn't mentioned. She opened the door and looked out. The landing was empty. The staircase below was dark. The light upstairs was off. The house was completely silent. Everyone had already gone to sleep. She walked downstairs to check the bedrooms, slowly, feeling a weird tightness in her chest. Every door was shut. She opened her mom's door quietly. Both her mom and stepdad were sound asleep. A and J were also out cold. Nothing was out of place. She told A about it in the morning, just in passing. I brushed it off at first. Maybe it was a dream or the wind whistling. The house was drafty. Old houses make strange sounds. They all laughed it off, including her stepdad, who was a hardcore skeptic. He didn't believe in anything paranormal. If you couldn't see it, touch it, or measure it, he didn't care. But then the same thing happened again. The next night, same time, same quiet sobbing right outside the bathroom door. And again, no one else heard it. Her sister was starting to get unnerved. By the 3rd night, she stopped using the bathroom unless someone else was awake. She didn't want to be alone on that landing anymore. Meanwhile, I started noticing something else. Late at night, she figured around 3 or 4 in the morning, she'd wake up to the sound of footsteps above them. Heavy footsteps, not creaks or settling wood, but the actual thud of feet walking across the floor. They would go from the living room to the kitchen, then back to the living room, back and forth. It wasn't fast or frantic, just steady pacing. At first, she thought maybe someone couldn't sleep. Maybe her stepdad was up, rummaging for a midnight snack or something. He had loud footsteps, noticeably louder than anyone else in the house. But in the morning, she'd ask him about it, and he'd just frown. He thought she'd been up walking around. Each thought it was the other. They all started to realize no one was admitting to being up at that hour. Then came the bedroom door. A and J had the room at the far end of the hallway. It had a thick, old wooden door that didn't close easily. You had to give it a good push for it to latch. They'd go to bed and shut the door, and a few minutes later it would slam open. Not drift open, not creak slowly like in horror movies. It would snap open like someone had kicked it or yanked it hard from the outside. It startled them the first time, but again, old houses shift. Maybe pressure from the heat or cold air moving through. But it kept happening. Every night. They even tried stacking a bag of clothes in front of the door to see if it would stop it from swinging open. Didn't. Still flew open, pushing the bag as if it was nothing. They didn't talk about it much during the day. Everyone felt weird, but no one wanted to say it out loud. It felt like drawing attention to it might make it worse. On the last night, they were all packing up and making plans for the morning. A and J went to bed like usual. They shut the door, made sure it latched. I was half asleep already, used to the routine by now. But when the door slammed open again, Jay sat straight up and grabbed her arm hard. She turned to him and he was just staring at the door, frozen. She looked over. There was a hand on the doorknob. Not the whole body, just the hand, holding the knob as if someone was standing on the other side of the door, arm extended in, not trying to hide. A real hand, pale, adult-sized, no sound, no movement, just the hand holding the knob, not trembling or moving. It stayed there long enough for her to start doubting if she was even seeing it right. But Jay saw it too. They both stared. After maybe 10 seconds, the hand pulled back, slowly, and the door stayed open. They didn't hear footsteps walking away. They didn't hear anything. But whatever it was, it left. Neither of them slept much after that. They didn't shut the door again. They just laid there, wide awake, waiting for morning. The next day, I was telling a local friend about the place. Just a casual mention, like, we stayed at this weird Airbnb on / specific street name. The friend immediately stopped her, asked for the exact address. I told her, and the friend just nodded slowly. She said she knew someone who had worked as a housekeeper there, maybe a year or two before. That woman had refused to ever go back. Said the house was bad. Not just creepy bad. Said she'd hear footsteps when no one else was in the house. Things would go missing and turn up in weird places. One time she found a pile of dirt on the second floor. Just a mound of earth, like someone had scooped it in from outside. But every door and window had been shut. The friend said nobody ever lasted long in that house. It was always on and off Airbnb, sometimes rented, sometimes unavailable. A few reviews mentioned strange things, noises, lights flickering, weird feelings at night, but it never stayed on the site long enough to build up a reputation. And Jay talked about it later after everyone left. They were both logical people. They didn't jump to ghosts or demons or any of that. They didn't need to. Whatever was happening in that house didn't need a label. It was just wrong. Some places are built on bad foundations. Old anger, maybe, or some deep sadness that sinks into the walls over time. Maybe someone had lived there who didn't want to leave. Not in a spirit way, just in the kind of emotional weight that stays stuck in places long after people are gone. Even her stepdad, who never believed in anything he couldn't explain, didn't argue when they all agreed not to go back. He didn't admit it out loud, but he looked shaken. And that, more than anything else, was what made it believe that whatever happened in that house wasn't just in their heads. They still talk about it sometimes. Not like a horror story, but more like a warning. Not every house is just a house. Sometimes you walk into someone else's leftover life, and sometimes that life doesn't want you there. None of them ever stayed in an Airbnb in Bath again. We had been planning the trip to Nashville for a few weeks. Just a weekend getaway, me and two of my closest friends, Jake and Marcus. We all loved football and figured we'd catch a game, get some drinks afterward, maybe even check out some live music while we were down there. None of us had ever been to Nashville before, so we were excited. We wanted a place where we each had our own room, which was surprisingly hard to find for a decent price near the stadium. But eventually, I found this Airbnb that seemed too good to pass up. It was just far enough outside the city to be affordable, but close enough that we wouldn't be driving for an hour to get anywhere. It was an older house, Looked like it had been around since at least the 60s. One of those single-story ranch-style homes with an unfinished brick exterior and a gravel driveway. The listing said it had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, plus a full kitchen and a fenced backyard. The pictures looked fine. Not luxurious, but clean. A little dated, maybe, but nothing sketchy. It had a decent rating and a bunch of reviews, mostly positive. The owner never really showed their face in the profile, but that's not unusual. We pulled up on a Friday afternoon. It was gray out, the sky thick with clouds, like it might rain, but it never did. The front yard was just patchy grass and a few bushes by the door. There was a wood-carved sign hanging beside the porch that read "Welcome" in faded white paint. The key was in a lockbox, just like the listing said. When we got inside, everything looked about how it did in the pictures. The kitchen had that fake marble countertop stuff and a white fridge that hummed a little too loud. The living room had an old couch with sagging cushions and a TV from maybe 2012. The bedrooms were fine. Mine had a queen bed, Jake's had bunk beds for some reason, and Marcus lucked out with the only room that had its own little half bath. After we set our bags down and grabbed some snacks from the kitchen, we started checking the place out. That's when we noticed the door in the hallway. It was between my room and the bathroom, painted the same off-white as the walls, but with a brass doorknob that didn't match any of the others in the house. It didn't take long to figure out it led to the basement. I don't know what it was, but the second I opened that door, I felt weird. It wasn't cold or anything, but I just got this sick sort of pressure in my chest, like anxiety or dread. The stairs creaked under our weight as we slowly walked down. The light switch didn't work, so we had to use our phone flashlights. The air changed the moment we crossed the threshold, thicker, damp, like it hadn't been aired out in years. The walls were stone, not cinder blocks or concrete, actual rough-cut stone like the inside of a well or an old cellar. There were pipes hanging low from the ceiling, some wrapped in insulation that had started to peel. A small water heater stood in one corner, and next to it, a rusted metal sink that looked like it hadn't been used since the 80s. Jake joked that it looked like something out of a horror movie. I didn't laugh. I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. I didn't see anything too out of place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to be down there, that the space existed for something other than just storage. We went back up, and that's when we realized the door wouldn't close. No latch, no magnetic catch, nothing to keep it shut. It swung open easily, like it had never been fitted properly. We didn't think too much of it at first. I figured I'd tell the owner in the review, maybe suggest they install a latch. But as the evening went on, the door kept swinging open just a little. Not wide, just a few inches. Enough to notice. We ended up putting a big laundry basket in front of it, filled it with shoes and some of our bags to keep it heavy. Stayed shut after that. We went to the game that night, Titans versus Bengals. Not the best matchup, but the crowd was electric. We drank a little more than we should have and hit a bar afterward. We didn't make it back to the house until almost 2:30 in the morning. It was dead quiet when we got back. The kind of silence you only hear in neighborhoods with no streetlights and too many trees. As we stumbled into the hallway, I noticed right away, the basket was moved. Not just nudged a bit like we accidentally brushed it on our way out. It had been pushed a good 5 feet away from the door, perfectly straight, as if someone had slid it with care rather than kicked it. The door itself was shut tight. No gap, no swinging open, just sealed shut like it was never a problem to begin with. I stopped and stared at it for a minute. I wasn't drunk enough to ignore it. Something about it was just wrong. Felt intentional, like whoever or whatever moved it didn't want us to know they'd gone in. Jake and Marcus were too far gone to care. They laughed, clapped each other on the back, and went off to their rooms without even noticing. I just stood there. That uneasy pressure was back in my chest, tighter this time. I pushed the basket back against the door and added one of the kitchen chairs in front of it, wedging the leg tight between the basket and the wall. I wasn't taking any chances. I locked my door before going to bed. I don't usually bother, especially when I'm with people I trust. But that night, I turned the lock and tested it twice. I pulled the curtains closed, turned off the light, and laid down. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like forever before I finally fell asleep. I woke up around 8 a.m., not to an alarm, but to a sound I couldn't place at first. It was soft, like the sound of metal gently brushing against metal. Then it clicked, the doorknob. I looked at my bedroom door and watched, frozen, as the knob slowly started to turn. Not jiggled, not yanked, just a slow, steady rotation like someone was deliberately testing the lock. I didn't say anything. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe too loud. The knob turned as far as it could go before stopping with a soft clunk. Then silence. I waited. My heart was pounding. Then I heard it. A quiet SHHH, like someone trying to calm a crying baby. Not loud, not angry, just patient and drawn out, like they were standing right on the other side of the door. I stayed in bed for a while after that. I didn't even check the hallway. I didn't want to know. I must have drifted off again because the next time I woke up, it was nearly 10 a.m. The house was louder now. Footsteps, the sound of the front door opening and closing. My friends were back from breakfast. I walked out and asked them why they tried to come into my room that morning. They looked confused, said they left for breakfast around 7:30 and didn't come back until just now. I asked again, told them what I heard. They both swore they hadn't touched my door. They were serious, not joking. And if you knew them like I do, you'd know they're terrible liars. I didn't say much after that. Just went through the motions, showered, packed, helped clean up. We checked out that afternoon. I didn't even want to stay another night, and neither did they, really. Something felt off, like we'd overstayed our welcome in a place that didn't want us there to begin with. A few days later, I pulled up the listing again. I don't know why. I guess I was trying to make sense of it all. The pictures were still there, still looked the same. But I noticed something I hadn't before. One of the reviews, buried down at the bottom, said something vague. Just a line or two. Great house, but had trouble sleeping. Woke up to sounds in the hallway a few times. Probably just the old plumbing. Basement gave me the creeps though. Would stay again, I guess. That was it. Nothing specific. Nothing like what I experienced. But it stuck with me. That someone else mentioned the basement without being prompted. That they had trouble sleeping too. I tried looking up the address, seeing if there was anything on record about the house. Past owners, incidents, anything weird. I didn't find much. Just that it had been listed on and off for rent over the last decade. Changed hands a couple times. Nothing criminal. Nothing paranormal. But here's the thing that stays with me. The way the doorknob turned. The way it moved slowly, like whoever was on the other side didn't want to break in, just wanted to check. That quiet SHHH that followed. Not threatening, just calm, like a warning. Or a secret. I think about that moment more than I should. Not because I believe in ghosts or anything like that. I don't. I really don't. But sometimes people forget that the scariest things aren't always dead. Sometimes it's the living. Sometimes it's the places people leave behind that keep some piece of them alive. And that basement? I don't know what went on down there. I don't know why the door wouldn't close properly, or how it managed to close itself tight that night. I don't know who or what pushed the basket aside. But I know this. Something wasn't right in that house. It wasn't a haunting. It wasn't a ghost story. It was just something wrong. Something real. And I'll never go back to find out what. It was the summer of 2016. And my boyfriend C and I had decided to take a short trip up to Vermont. We both had a few days off work and wanted to get away from everything for a bit. Something quiet, away from screens and cities and noise. I found this little off-grid cabin on Airbnb. It had something like 300 reviews, all 5 stars, and the pictures made it look rustic but charming. One room, a little potbelly stove, no electricity, no Wi-Fi, just wood, candles, and silence. It sounded perfect for a break from the world. The listing said it was on a remote piece of property way down a dirt road, and the host lived about half a mile away in a separate house, but she wouldn't be there that weekend. That meant we'd have the whole place to ourselves. I remember thinking that it was going to be exactly what we needed. A little privacy, no internet, just each other and the woods. What could go wrong? We left early in the morning and made a whole day of it. stopping at a few scenic spots on the drive up. The weather was warm, not too hot, just a perfect Vermont summer day. The dirt road that led to the cabin twisted through thick woods, the kind where the trees are so dense that sunlight barely makes it to the forest floor. The road had deep ruts and old tire tracks, and we passed no other cars. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, it was about 4 in the afternoon. The place was exactly like the pictures, maybe even better. A little wooden structure with a steep roof and a small loft inside. The only light was from the large windows and the sun filtering through the trees. There were shelves with old books, a little 2-burner propane stove, and a big cooler that the host had left stocked with ice for us. Outside, there was a tiny fire ring and a few rough-hewn benches made from logs. Felt peaceful. C unloaded the car while I lit a few candles and started getting our food ready. We had a nice evening. After a long hike earlier that day, we were both tired, so we made a simple dinner, beans and rice with some grilled vegetables, and ate by candlelight at the little wooden table. We played cards, drank a little wine we brought, and just enjoyed being completely disconnected from everything. There was no cell service, no noise from traffic or neighbors, just the chirping of insects and the occasional crack of a branch in the woods. By 10 p.m., I was exhausted. I told C I was going to head up to the loft and sleep. He said he wanted to stay out a bit longer to smoke and maybe look at the stars. I left him outside and climbed the ladder to the loft, which was just a low platform with a mattress and a couple of wool blankets. You couldn't stand up in it, but it was cozy. I must have fallen asleep almost instantly, but I was in that weird in-between place. Not fully asleep, but not awake either, when I heard it. A bang. Loud, hard, sudden. It came from the side of the cabin, maybe 10 or 15 feet away from where I was lying. It was like someone had hit the side of the wood wall with a fist or a rock. It jolted me awake. At first, I wasn't even sure I'd heard it. My mind tried to piece it together, thinking maybe it was a dream or a branch falling. Then I heard C's voice calling up from outside. "Was that you?" I sat up and yelled back down, still groggy and confused. "No, was it you?" He said no, but didn't sound panicked. I figured maybe it was just something falling from a tree. It's Vermont, after all. Lots of animals. Maybe a branch broke off and hit the roof or the wall. That's what I told myself, and I tried to settle back in. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, there was another bang. This one didn't sound like something falling. It was lower to the ground. A sharp swaging sound like something heavy had struck the bottom edge of the wall. It made the whole structure vibrate slightly. This time I jumped out of bed and climbed down the ladder. C was just coming in through the front door. He had a flashlight in one hand and his hunting knife in the other. I asked him what he thought it was. He looked uneasy. He said he didn't see anyone or anything outside, but thought he heard something that sounded like footsteps, slow and spaced apart. He wasn't sure. Then we heard it, a scraping noise, not like an animal scuffling around, but a slow, deliberate drag of something against the wood. It started on one wall and trailed for about 3 feet before stopping. It was too exact, too calm. Not frantic or curious like an animal. I could feel my heart starting to race. C told me to grab anything sharp and get back up in the loft. He was trying to stay calm, but I could tell something in him had switched. He handed me a small bundle of steak knives we'd used earlier and said he'd stay downstairs in case someone tried to come in. The main room of the cabin had huge windows on 3 sides, and half of them were just screens. If someone wanted to come in, it wouldn't take much. I didn't want to leave him, but he told me again to go, and I did. I climbed up and sat in the middle of the mattress, clutching the knives in both hands. I tried to breathe slowly, to listen. Every creak and pop of the cabin made me jump. I couldn't hear C anymore, just the blood rushing in my ears. Then came the scraping again, louder this time, starting near the back corner of the cabin and dragging all the way around one side. It was followed by a crunching sound, clear, deliberate footsteps walking slowly along the gravel and leaves that lined the outside of the cabin. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause, crunch. They moved from one side of the cabin to the other. No talking, no rustling, no animals sniffing around, just walking, like someone pacing the perimeter. After a while, C climbed up into the loft and pulled the ladder up behind him. He whispered that he didn't like how visible he was from all those windows. Up in the loft, we could see anyone approaching, but we'd also have the advantage of not being right next to a window if they tried to get in. He said if it came down to it, he'd rather fight from here than down below where someone could jump in from 3 directions. We sat there for hours. Every time the sound stopped, I hoped it was over, but then they'd start again. A bang, a scrape, the slow footsteps. There was a time when something rattled loudly near the potbelly stovepipe outside. It sounded like someone grabbing it and trying to climb or shake it. The metal groaned. We didn't speak. We didn't move. I kept waiting for the moment the door would burst open or a shadow would cross the window. I imagined 100 different ways someone could get in, 100 different horrible endings. I thought of all the horror movies I'd ever watched and how real this felt now. Not the ghosts or monsters, but the part where you know someone's out there, watching, deciding. At one point, something scraped hard against the screen of the back window. Just one long, slow scratch. Z clutched his knife tighter. I think he was ready to jump down if anything came through. I was frozen, sitting cross-legged with 2 knives still in my hands, breathing as quietly as I could. It went on like that, off and on, for hours. The bangs would stop for a while, then come back. The footsteps would disappear, then start again from a different side. Sometimes there were long gaps, just silence. Those were the worst because I kept thinking maybe this is the moment. Maybe they're right outside the door, just waiting. Finally, around 5 a.m., I heard a rooster in the distance. Then another. It was faint, but it sounded far off down the dirt road. The light in the loft began to change. Slowly, the sky turned from black to deep blue to gray. The sounds stopped completely, as if they'd been cut off by the light. No more footsteps, no scraping, no banging. C and I stayed frozen for a while, just waiting to make sure it wasn't some kind of trick. When the sun had fully risen and light was pouring into the cabin, we climbed down together. Neither of us had really slept. I felt like my whole body had been tensed for 8 straight hours. Every muscle ached. We checked the outside of the cabin carefully. There were no clear footprints, which was weird considering how soft the ground was. No real scraping marks either. Just one part near the back window where the screen looked slightly bent. But that could have already been there. We couldn't be sure. Our car was untouched. Tires fine, doors locked. No signs of tampering. We packed quickly and didn't talk much. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing at the edge of the woods. But there was nothing, just the sound of birds and wind through the trees. I messaged the host later to tell her what happened. She wrote back kindly and said she was sorry, but it was probably a porcupine. That didn't sit right with either of us. I've heard animals at night before. I've been camping for years. This wasn't wildlife. Not unless you've got porcupines walking upright, dragging tools, and pacing around a cabin for 6 hours in the dead of night without making a single sound other than scraping and footsteps. Z thinks it was a local, someone who knew the host was away, maybe didn't like outsiders coming to the area. He thinks they were trying to scare us off, or maybe just enjoying the power of knowing we were helpless and terrified. I've thought about it a lot since then, and I still don't know what to believe. There's something about being that far removed from help that strips you down. Makes everything feel raw and real. If someone wanted to hurt us that night, they could have. No one would have known for days. That's what scared me the most. The helplessness. We never went back to Vermont after that.